All right, so why don't we get this started? Welcome to the Foxborough AdCom meeting. Before we kick off with the education, the school department, I want to just introduce everybody to Eric and Mike, two new members of the AdCom. So welcome, guys. Thank you for joining us. It's, the first time around is a bit of a sleigh ride, but ask questions as you see them and start digging into the details. If you hear an acronym that's unfamiliar, demand to know what it is, just, feel free to jump in. So today we have Dr. Bertos and Mr. Yukna to talk through the education budget. So I'm actually going to share my screen. Hey, Dan. Just made it into the wire, pal. Okay. Can you see that?
Yeah.
And if I do the presentation mode, which doesn't always work on Zoom, and can you see it that way?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so let's work from that. So let's go right ahead.
All right, well, thank you everyone for being here with us this evening. Our budget message is one that, if you've been on AdCom before, is going to be familiar. It's going to maintain our high level of educational services. It's also going to respond to our shifting populations and the related needs of those shifting populations. It is consistent with our approach in the past, as far as having a strong commitment to education. One thing that's new this year is our new plan for success, which formerly was called our strategic plan. And as you can see here, these are the 4 pillars that are outlined in that plan. It's also on our website. But these 4 areas are really what drive our focus, our initiatives, and our budget moving forward. So each of those objectives has strategic initiatives, and then we have 1-year action plans that go along with those targeted initiatives for each year. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of work to be done under each of those, and we are going to focus our budget on being able to put forth those initiatives and meet those goals, but we're also going to preserve our current programs, our services to students. We have excellence at everything that we do and the decisions that we make for what's best for students, prioritizing what their needs are in order to continue to preserve those programs, reasonable class sizes. And then at the same time, know that we're living in a different world. We went 1-to-1 with computers based on COVID. That happened much faster than what we would have done in rolling something like that in when we went K-12 with devices for every student and every teacher last year, with part of the outcome of COVID actually. So we've also seen increased facility costs, and then other technology tools that go along with those devices, with having different software platforms and licensing, and increased costs actually in both licensing and facility costs. And then always having to make sure that we meet all the guidelines that are put out by the state. So we can go, Paul, to the next slide.
Yep.
So I'll let Bill kind of pick up here on this slide.
So basically, a concept that was developed years and years ago. Everybody knows there's going to be retirements within every budget that's in town. But at this point, or at the time we start these budgets, especially back in November, December, we don't have a list of teachers that are looking to retire at this point, and they're not required to obviously notify us that early. So what was developed years ago was that, there would be an assumed savings for teachers that would retire at the end of the year, that you would, potentially be reducing somebody at the highest salary or higher salary and bringing in somebody at a lower salary. And therefore, even though our budget is based on the staff we have today, this 125 comes right off the bottom of our budget before it gets to what the taxpayers pay. The assumption typically is that we need between 4 and 5 retirements to equal the 125. If we're fortunate enough in many cases to be able to hire at the lowest level because it's, standard core curriculum courses, that's great. But as you can imagine, when you look at specific areas within our environment, we have, things like science teachers and foreign language and a number of other teachers that basically are very hard to get. And sometimes you're just not able to find people that are coming right out of college, and you're looking for somebody that you can bring in from potentially another district. So sometimes it takes more retirements to get to that. We have made it over the last, 10 years that I've been here, but we've had a couple of real close years, again, because we never know who's retiring. Okay, Paul. So as you know, the Board of Selectmen set a limit of 2.5% on the budget increase. Unfortunately for us this year, it's really a little bit harder because we have 6 negotiating units all being negotiated for the FY23 budget. So our teachers, our ed assistants, our secretaries, school buses, extended day, and our kitchen facility, our kitchen people are basically all new contracts that will be that we're working on currently. So we don't have defined numbers for those, but we're talking about nearly 420 staff members that this will impact. And we also have increased expenses, as you'll see in this presentation. So it's going to be an interesting one. The unions don't like the fact that there's already a predefined number that we can't exceed. But that's, in our mind, that's the standard that the rest of the town accepts. And that's what we're pushing with all the unions as well.
And we've talked about this on on the last call, but I think every contract in the town is up, right? Including all of yours.
Yeah, we had 3 that we negotiated last year, which are really 3 of our smallest ones. There are custodial facilities and crossing guards. That's the smallest group. They were negotiated at a 1.522 rate. Okay. So those are locked in. Those are the only ones that we really know there's true salaries for next year. You're right, police, fire, and DPW are all up. Water and sewer, those are all up this year as well.
Okay. And do you, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Bill, this is Dennis Keefe. So these salary increases, contract increases are covered in the salary reserve budget as well?
So yes, good question, Dennis. Basically the way our budget has always been done is we have the money within the budget itself. We don't come back to the town when the contracts are ending to be negotiated. That's why I say it's a little tricky for us, because obviously if we get into a situation where one of the unions, either through mediation or some kind of a forced situation, pushes us over what this allows us to do, we have to try to figure out how to make it up someplace else. Where else are we going to cut to do it, I guess, is basically what it comes down to. And knock on wood, to this point, the schools have never come back to the town looking for additional funding. So I guess I'll take this, Amy, but you can add into it. So as you'll see, there's the difference is every year, the top part of this. So we completed last year's budget, obviously in the May timeframe. It was approved. We go into the year and we're assessing stuff all through the summer and seeing exactly what our needs are. If things have changed based on a change in our program or in our delivery for special education or something of that nature, we will make staffing changes. We are one of the our budget, I'm sure is an autonomous budget where we can move between salaries and expenses. But typically we don't do much of that, but we do move salary things. So if we have a teaching position on one level that we feel that there's been enough of an enrollment change in one of the schools, but we need that position in another school because of the enrollment change there, we will move positions around to make that happen. So in this case, during the summer, there was actually a conscious decision to change our delivery model for special education. And what we were doing was actually reducing the number of educational assistants, which are basically our support staff for within the classroom, and replacing those with 2 highly qualified special education teachers. And that model that we reinstituted for this particular program also was one that helped us keep some students within our school district rather than having to have them go outside of the school district for a tuitioned in education. So again, we will make those kind of changes based on what we see, in students after the budget is done, if we see appropriate need. So that's what the top is. As you can see, we reduced down 6 ed assistants effectively and put in 2 teachers, which is pretty much a dollar for dollar change. And then we had a reduction of some ed assistants just because of remote enrollment revisions that we just didn't need the positions, kids graduating or actually not needing a certain level of service anymore. FY23, you can see there's a number of changes that we're making here. Again, very typical that we would have these changes in a given year to satisfy the needs of our programs. The one point I want to really kind of make here, you'll see a lot of positions in that lower, from the middle of the 1.0 quota down. So the 0.5, social worker, the EL teacher and stuff. A lot of this is being supported by state and federal grants under the ARPA or the American Rescue Plan, that what they're doing is giving many school districts a lot of leeway or leverage to be able to bring in specialists to support the kids based on what's happened for the last couple of years. So social workers, nurses, additional liaisons as far as for education wise to deal between the schools and the families. It's not going to, these are going to be funded for partially this year, partially and fully next year. And then the funding goes away. We don't anticipate a lot of these positions would exist afterwards at this point, at least. But the point is, if we're going to get these funds, we're going to try to do the best we can for students that we know have some special needs. If it wasn't for that grant funding, we would actually be showing a 7.2 FTE reduction in our budget for next year. Again, these positions aren't costing the town, and they're not taxpayer related dollars in the sense of Foxborough. Obviously, they're also taxpayer related dollars in the sense of federal funds are our money just as much as that. But so it's resources we're being given, and we're going to do the best we can for the students over the next year and a half, 2 years, well, this year, next year, so 2 years to, support additional needs that they all seem to have at this point.
Bill, are the Brigham and Women grants because of their relationship with the town, or is that some other source?
No, the Brigham and Women's grant, is partially, I would say, because of the relationship with the town, but it was an open grant that we applied for. So other towns got it as well. And, it was, like all of these grants, they're all somewhat competitive, except for the ESSER grants. The ESSER, as I said, is just each town got X amount of dollars, in this sense, just like our town side is getting, the $5 million roughly that's coming from the federal government. So, all I would say most of the other ones are, when you look at some of the other stuff, it's competitive where you have to put it in and hope that you'll get it. But the Brigham's was definitely one of those.
Right. Good.
So Bill, most of these go away, or maybe all of these. I guess my question is the IT desktop support. So I know one of the themes is technologically the schools have had to really adapt in the last couple of years quite a bit. And they've gotten some support in that, but a lot of that, I guess, goes away because of grants going away. So does that mean? Well,
this is one area, as you may not. This is one area where we basically developed the IT department that services both the town and the schools. And obviously with the addition of the one-to-one environment, and with the large amount of data that we store both on town side and on the school side, we really have been underpositioned in the IT department area. So this was actually something that is giving us a year and a half breather. Yep. To try to rebuild, some of our supports, try to catch back up. Because as Dr. Berto said, with that push out of the one-to-one last year, a lot of stuff had to get pushed to the side because that was such a large, project. If you think about it, it was about 2,700 laptops between students and teachers, and then all the networking that had to go along with it. So we were in pretty good shape as a district because we've been kind of a little bit more advanced in our data centers and stuff like that. But again, really it's been a real pressure on the staff to be able to keep this up. So I think this is a breather. I think we'll have to be reassessed after FY23 by the town and the schools to see if what the need is at that point.
Exactly what I was wondering. And I know some support you can provide through a revolving fund, but the rest of it is stuff you have to pay for, right?
Yeah, and the revolving fund basically we put that together for parents because we do know accidents happen with computers, and so we basically put in a point where they can do like a self-insurance thing for a very short amount of money. I think we have it out there at either $35 or $40 per computer. And to be honest with you, I mean, we're getting computers back at times that are virtually being totally replaced. And obviously that $40 didn't cover that. So, but the program has worked so far because the majority of the kids are doing a good job maintaining the equipment. And when the accidents happen, there's enough money in the fund to handle that. We also became, just so you can see why there's a little bit more stress on the IT support. We became a service center for Lenovo, which is where our computers come from. And by doing that, we can do all the warranty work internally, and they send us the parts, and we send them back the defective parts. So we shorten the time frame in which a computer is returned to a student. Number one, but number two, we also get paid basically to support the physical cost side of what it takes to rebuild a computer when it happens. So it's worked out very well for us on that side.
Okay. Any other questions from the AdCom on this exhibit? There's a lot going on. All right, Bill, I'm going to roll forward.
Good. So, as we said, the major components of the FY23, Dr. Burdos, gave you that it's there is some adjustments in salaries, but that's again, us moving between our different budget areas for where we see the current needs. Most of the expenses are level funded. I'm going to point out a couple fairly large hits we're taking that aren't level funded, but everything else is pretty much level funded. It has been for a number of years. One of our biggest balancing groups basically under special ed is the out-of-district tuitions. Give you an idea on that, an out-of-district tuition going to a collaborative program can run about $40,000 plus transportation. Transportation could be about $35,000 for a student. So, that's on the lower end. We do have students that are in residential programs, and those can cost in the, hundreds of thousands on an annual basis. So we do the best we can to maintain the programs internally, but there are some things that we just are not capable of doing for students that have certain needs. So I think that's, it's always our interest is to keep students within the district because we think it's the best for the child as well. Utility cost, I sit on the group with Bill Keegan and a couple others that go out and do all the utility bidding. We've done a really good job for locking in gas and electric rates for the next 3 years for the town, but they have gone up and will go up a little bit next year. So we're seeing expense adjustments there. And then, as I already noted, we've got 6 contracts that we're in negotiations on. So from the upper section of this is basically the salary changes. So as I said, we're basically a net of 1.2, deduction. But that's and from a dollar point of view, the majority of our dollar increase in salaries is all in what will be our negotiated increases. Everything else we're pretty much flat on. The expense side is the lower section of this. So you can see that the program that we kind of put in last year is actually giving us some value. Plus we've been by bringing some kids back. Plus we have a couple that are actually aging out of the system. We do know we have 1 or 2 coming in from other schools that will be responsible for next year, but we're still showing between transportation and tuitions a decrease of about $142,000, $143,000. So that's a real positive. Last year in the last couple of years, we had an upswing. So it's nice to see it going back down the other direction. We do have, again, one of the grants is giving us money for special education instructional supplies. So again, it will go away in our budget next year when this grant goes away, but we're going to take advantage of it and put in the stuff that we could use for the next few years. Our technology software licenses, as Dr. Burrows pointed out earlier, is really one that's caught up to us in a big way, because now we're virtually licensing, not only operating systems, but books and software and programs that help us to correlate and tie the program, the curriculum together with the kids, and that's going to increase our licensing by almost 218,000 for next year, and would be kind of consistent. We tried to do those licenses for 3+ years, so that we know that change shouldn't be much over the next few years, but it's a huge change for this coming year. Buses, we're actually facing a little bit of a crisis in our busing fleet in general. If you remember, 2 years ago, we didn't get any CIP money for buses, so we weren't able to replace any. Last year, between CIP and what we had for additional funding in our budget, because of COVID reductions, we were actually able to order 4 buses on July 1st. We are not going to receive those 4 buses until July 1st of this year. Typically, we receive them within 4 months, and it's all because of the supply chain issues that the busing company is finding, which is pushing us to having more repairs on some of the buses, and some concern about whether or not we'll have enough buses running at all times. We've already pulled one off the road because it will not pass the inspection side from our side. And our mechanics, are warning us that there are 2 others that they think will not pass inspection potentially next time around. They're fine at this point, but they can see issues that are going to be probably too great in repair costs to go through with in the future. Custodial supplies, about 50% of this increase is going to be covered by a PPE grant. So again, we're going to require stuff that we can use going forward. But the other part of this is that we are now doing a much different job cleaning buildings. We always thought our buildings were extremely clean, but now we're into really a disinfectant stage as well, which is putting additional cost on the 5 buildings that we operate. Again, hopefully that's something that as this all starts to calm down, that cost will go away in the FY24 budget, we hope. I think we're all praying for that at this point. And then, a handful of other accounts that equals that final miscellaneous amount. So as you can see, there's a fairly, of that $964,000, that's our increase for the year. We're chewing up almost a third of it just in what we need to do for expense changes.
Bill, before you leave this slide, in terms of the union contracts, do you have a sense of what percentage are at the top of the range in terms of steps?
Oh yeah, we have about 65% of our teachers are at their top step. Wow. That isn't a, I want to be clear on that. They are at the top step, but some of them still can move over a lane. So they could have their master's plus 15. And even though they're on the top step, if they get their master's 30, they could obviously move over a step that way, but they're still on the top step. So it's about 65% of teachers. We've got about a third of our educational assistants are on top step, and the rest of the groups only have a couple steps, and most of those would be on the top steps as far as custodial and things of that nature.
Good, thank you.
Can I ask a question? Our previous slide mentioned about service based on staffing adjustment. Can you give us an example, like what kind of service based on staffing?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So one of the things that's outlined in our plan for success is really looking at a co-teaching model, which is a more inclusive environment for our students, and having a special educator working with our regular educators to be able to service students. And so by reducing the number of educational assistants and instead having a certified special educator where you have a higher level of expertise, then you're going to be able to better or more greatly meet the needs of the students. So going to a co-teaching model, and then at the same time in some of our other our programs, like our therapeutic program, meeting the needs of those students by having a special educator come on instead of, as Bill was saying before, have those students not being able to meet their needs in district, and then they become an out of district placement.
Thank you.
All right, Bill, one other question. Can you clarify again the utility cost, the issue in the 22 budget?
Yeah, so kind of embarrassing, but fortunately it was a COVID year, so we survived it. When we reorganized, we've been, over the last 2 or 3 years, we've been really trying to hone in on making every line have the accurate amount value-wise. So if you look in our budget area for utilities, you'll see there's a number of accounts broken down underneath that. And we did some reorganization of making sure that, if gas was 50,000 that we actually spent over the last couple of years, that the gas line was 50,000. The same thing with electric, where before the total number for utilities always got us through, but we were just trying to really hone them in and be accurate. When we made one of the adjustments, we actually didn't put one of the numbers back in, and it actually dropped about $80,000 off of the budget. It kind of helped us with the budget, from a look last year. And fortunately, as I said, because of COVID, we had reductions that we didn't end up spending it. So we got away with it and got lucky on it. But otherwise, we would have had to make that little goof up on our side someplace.
Okay. You ended up returning a fair chunk of money last year, I remember.
We returned $470,000 last year. And even with that, we were still able to, get the additional buses, as I said, and also to support the replacement of one of the large cooling tower units at the Ahern with the approval of the CIP on both of those. So we would have returned more, but again, it would have been just one of those. We'll return it, but you have to give it back to us in order to be able to support the program. So very transparent on how we did it. But I think, again, the reason that COVID kind of did that for us, if you think about it, we had so many programs we couldn't run. Our athletic program alone, which costs in coaches and, referees and everything else, cost us, hundreds of thousands of dollars. We didn't do much of that last year. So all of that kind of cost got reduced down. Programs that we typically would have run after school because we were really closing the buildings down, we didn't do. So it really reduced in so many areas cost. And again, I think we've been very transparent about this. We don't just spend money. We spend it based on our need. If we don't need it, we're going to give it back. And if you look over the last few years, the last 10 years, we've given back a substantial amount of money from our budget. Wherever we can save during the year, we're going to save. And if we can't, then obviously it's because we have a dedicated need we have to deal with.
Okay. Any questions from the AdCom before I roll on? I can only see half of you, so you're going to have to speak up if you got a question. All right.
So, every year we show what the change has been for the last X amount of years. And as you can see, this is going to be one of the smallest increases we've had in the last 10 years at the 965 at 2.5%. Again, it's, it is what it is. We all understand the concerns financially within the town. And we're just going to have to make it work with our union agreements. Enrollments,
I have a question on that.
Sure, Jack.
Yeah, and just to clarify, in past year, the town has instituted a new system where the projected salary increase money is put in a separate budget. And now, do you follow that model as well?
We have it within our budget. The town has a single budget on their side for all their unions.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking is if that were put aside, then the projected numbers would not be the same, would not be on the same basis, but these are on the same basis.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, our budget's an all-in budget, including all of our projected COLA increases, just as theirs is.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a great question.
So as you can see, since 2017, we've actually had a reduction of about 180 students. You can also see that the problem with the reduction is that it doesn't happen in one area. So, even in a given year of having a reduction of 30 or 40, if it's spread across 5 buildings, it's not always enough to be able to make a change as far as staffing. On the elementary level, the complication there is even though your total first grade number, if you were going to dictate a population of 20 or 22 in a classroom, sounds great, but if one school virtually has a reduction and the other 2 have increases, what you end up sometimes having is a class size of 17 in one building and a class size of 23 in another building. And that's just the problem with having neighborhood schools on the elementary level. There's not much you can do about it. We are constantly looking at the numbers, and we won't, at this point, we've always felt that basically 23 is the high number on the elementary level that we want to deal with. And sometimes, you can't go and take only 2 classes that might be on one of the schools that would have 48 and say you're going to make it, or no, say 50 and make it 25. But if you divide it in 3, that's when you end up with a smaller class size. So we'll have pockets in every building that there'll be a little bit smaller and a little bit larger class size it's a balancing act through the process. And as you can see, our out of district, again, we think has been a kind of a nice trend here from the 38 that we had in FY21 down to what we're projecting now of almost 28.
Bill, just one question.
I just wanted to make one other comment on our enrollment. What we have seen in the last several years that has not been typical of the past is transitions during the school year. We could see as many between 60 and 80 students in and out of Foxborough, and that's not something in the last 10 years that we typically see. But in the last, say, 3 to 4 years, we see more of that.
Yeah, that's true.
Just a question. It looks like if we exclude preschool and just look at elementary, middle, and high school, the teaching staff has gone up by, I'll say, 14, 15. Meanwhile, the population of students has gone down by, 180 or thereabouts. They're heading in the wrong way.
Well, a lot of that, though, Jack, as we explained before, is the programs that we're bringing internally. It's cheaper to have an internal, special ed program where you can service 2, 3, or 4 students than it is to put those 2, 3, or 4 outside the district. And our educational process for the special ed has changed significantly. Again, because the costs outside have gone up anywhere from 5 to 50% on tuition rates on a yearly basis, granted by the state. So we're really in a mode where we're trying to retain students as best we can and keep that cost down, because what we'd be trading is those teaching positions for out-of-district tuitions.
So you're saying over the last half dozen years, we added approximately 14 teaching positions. Most of those are in the special ed world? I
would say there's a fair amount in special ed.
That would explain it if that were the case. But, yeah.
It's not just a special ed teacher. You have to think about like an occupational therapist, a speech language pathologist. It's our service delivery. Yeah. So it's not classroom teachers. We've actually reduced the number of social workers. We've actually reduced the number of classroom teachers over the last several years.
But it's the related services, and that's one of the biggest issues. The social emotional issues relative to students, at this point, and even actually over the last 4 or 5 years, I think has changed significantly. And that's where, the additional support with social workers and stuff like that, things that we may have had 1 in the district before and now have 3 on the different levels to be able to manage is creating some of those issues as well.
Thank you.
I have a question. One of the things that struck me looking at this exhibit, and we talked about it the other day, is if you look at the preschool line and you ignore sort of the COVID year, that's up a little. And if you look at elementary school, it's down just marginally. And then you've got a wave of something passing through the middle school that's already starting to hit the high school. So it just looks like that one big wave of reduction is going to move through. What are the implications of that for staffing?
So we do this every year where we take our look at our programs that we're offering on the middle school. For the middle school, we made some very large changes in the last couple of years on teaching positions in the 5th and 6th grade level because the number of students on those levels dropped enough. The 5th and 6th grade level is more like the elementary level in the way the delivery is done. So if you were to drop 50 students out of those two levels, you effectively are dropping 2 teachers. So, and we did do that, and we were able to get through that part of the process. The problem that happens on 7th and 8th grade and on the high school level is now kids move from class to class. So, it's not that you have a homeroom teacher that teaches every subject going through the process. Kids have choices to go to, AP class level versus honor class level versus college prep class level. And by having that, you end up with, it's a much harder model to reduce teacher base on. Now, that being said, we've still done that, and it's, but we're doing like, 2/10 of an FTE, or a 0.4 FTE that we're reducing, because that's the way that it works in that model, and it's much harder to deal with. But elementary through 6th grade is much easier when we have fluctuations in student base that we can eliminate or add a teacher depending on what the needs are.
I'll also add, what's really important to note is what the town values. And when you think about the number of courses, whether advanced placement, whether they're elective courses, being able to have, when we talk about work to career, we offer a lot of variety of courses. So it's what the town values, and being able to offer those elective courses and then the different leveled courses as well, particularly when you're looking at the high school level.
I'm sure you can understand, you take an AP class, which is basically a college level class that's being offered within the high school. You're not going to have classes of 25, for that, just because based on kids' schedules, number one, but based on the number of kids that take AP level. You still want to offer it because it's a great opportunity for the child, and it's a great opportunity for the parents if they can get lucky enough not to have to pay for some course levels at the college level. But it just doesn't give you that same nice round number where every class is going to be 22. And as I said before, it gets even more complicated than that when you think about the high school, because, the college prep class, is a standard. The honors is the next level up. The AP is the next level up. You could have that same course, an English course that you're teaching on 3 levels based on the kids' abilities. And to be able to challenge them, if you offered only college prep, you would not be able to satisfy the needs of many students that way.
You just think about the programs, whether there's 3 different levels, 3 different opportunities for different world languages. There's opportunities for students to be able to take engineering to woodworking, to home improvement, the course variety for students in the programs. So that's when we talk about the budget message, is really supporting that excellence in the programs that are existing today.
I have a question. I have a couple of questions. This is Rafaela. Can we contract like special services out? Would that be cheaper? Like, instead of having 2 or 3 speech pathologists, could students have it contracted out, or occupational therapists, or are these special positions that are full-time in the schools?
They're full-time. It would be much more expensive to do contracting out. We've actually moved from that in order to have a cost savings.
Yeah,
Okay.
What was the BCA?
The BCBA, which is a behavioral support therapist.
Right.
So what we were getting was less than half an FTE. And we were paying as much as we're paying for the staff member that we put in.
Okay.
So we get a lot more service capability at a much cheaper cost. You have to think about it. You're not only paying that person, you're paying the company they work for and then you're paying for a profit. So versus us just paying for the teacher itself.
Yeah, the coming from healthcare, Bill, the markup on those contract labor is exorbitant.
Really? Okay.
I get that completely. My question was over time, and I think Amy made this point. It's not always the teachers that drive the salary. It's some of these non-teacher professionals, like the coders and the speech pathologists and the psychologists. Has there been a lot of growth in those areas over the past 5 years?
It's been growth in the FTEs. Like we've gone from a 0.6, then we've moved up to a 0.7. Like for instance, one of our occupational therapists went from a 0.8. It took 3 years to move to a 0.9 and now is at a 1.0. And it really goes back to the caseload and looking at the number of students that they service. So it's been incremental.
But I would say, as Dennis, as far as that goes, you're looking at really some of the things like the social worker level that, 10 years ago, I don't even know if we had one in the district, to be honest with you. And obviously now, not only what we have internally, but what the grants are going to support, for the next year and a half, it's a significant number, so I think you're looking at just a very different service requirement on top of just the core curriculum.
In comparison to previous years, we've been talking here almost entirely on headcount and dollars. And I remember in the past having some discussions about here's new courses that are being added, or maybe something not so. Now, maybe that's the wrong thing to even look at coming out of COVID, where much of the year has been online. But has there been an effort to add or subtract courses either at the AP level or get ready for the workplace or the military?
So, two courses that are elective courses that come to mind right now is one on sports media that was new this current school year. Another one is a Hamilton course in the humanities area. As far as things like computer science and engineering, those end up alternating each year. We didn't add any new courses for this next FY23 because we had 3 new courses for this year. And a student's schedule only allows them to take, obviously, so many courses. And then we have to look at the enrollment number and see if we can run the course. And if there's not enough students subscribed to that course, then we have to talk with them about their schedules. So if you looked at our program of studies, not every single one of those courses runs every year because it depends on enrollment, but teachers have a full teaching load every year. Some of their courses just might change. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You want to go to the next screen, Paul? So our sources of revenue come from 2 different points. Obviously, we have what the taxpayers are putting towards our budget, but then we have this other bucket, which is what we call our outside resources. And that's broken into basically 3 categories. Revolving accounts, that would be things like our building rental, our extended day, our food service. We have probably about 10 revolving accounts that we maintain. Athletics. And the revolving accounts, with whatever revenue they bring in, what we do is typically charge that back against one of our utility accounts because we don't charge rent to ourselves. So we let those different like athletics pay for. Obviously, it pays for some of its officiating and stuff like that, but it also will pay some money towards electricity or gas. The grants are the things that typically we're going out and applying for each year. The base of them, so if you look at the FY22 number, those grants that made up that number are pretty solid. They stay very, very consistent year to year.
Hey, Bill, I really apologize for interrupting. Is Mike with FCA, is the screen sharing? I'm seeing the live feed being the Brady Bunch montage. Thanks.
Okay, sorry. So
Sorry about that.
the 1.1 million in FY22, that's pretty much our base of standard grants that we apply for each year, and that, will go up and down a few dollars, but they stay in the relative range. For FY23, you can see that I've kind of called out, there's almost 486,000 of one-time grants, which will be actually FY23 and FY24 money that are involved in this budget. Again, you have to understand, if it's a federal or state grant, the one big issue there is we get audited on those. You're not allowed to use those grants to supplement your budget, meaning that if I had $500,000 in grants, I can't take $500,000 worth of taxpayer cost and say, okay, I'm going to use these grants to do it. These are all supposed to be, and not supplant, I meant. They have to be supplemental. So you have to be adding services on top to use those grants. If you do supplant, meaning that you reduce what the taxpayers pay, they basically take the money back. So that's why that 400,000, you'll see additional expenses in the budget, but you see this as an additional revenue source. They wipe each other out. Circuit breaker is the state's way of trying to neutralize the hit that out-of-district tuitions can cause to many communities. A couple of years back, we had, 2 students go out on residential placements that we had not had out before. And, if it wasn't for something like circuit breaker, we just never would have been able to financially handle that. So the 800,000 roughly that we get in from circuit breaker basically helps us to cover some of the costs of what we spent last year. So it's money from the previous year's expenditures that you get to put to your next year's budget. And, in this case, that's 800,000 that the taxpayers aren't paying because it came from state revenue versus town revenue. Again, we're all paying it. I get the point, but it's not coming from from property taxes.
Hey, Bill, John Mahoney here. So could you remind me next budget year, when that funding is gone, what happens to those positions? Do those people know that they're on a 1 year maybe type of situation, or you come back and try to fund them a different way?
Well, probably, I guess I could point to the one that there'll be discussions on after most of these grants are going FY23 and FY24. So we have a little bit of time here before that discussion will happen. The one grant, the one that's covering the IT cost for the additional support based on the amount of technology that we're trying to maintain in the town in total. That one, I'm sure, will be a discussion down the road. But there are others here that, quite honestly, I don't think the town will be able to support while supporting the rest of the educational thing, depending on how obviously increases go for COLAs and stuff like that. So we know there's going to be trade-offs. We know it's going to be gone. But that's kind of a common thing, though. We had that in our, we employ a teacher under our Title I area, and that teacher knows under her contract that basically if the money goes away, the position goes away. Mm-hmm. So yes, when we hire positions that are under grants, they are called out as that, and the staff knows that. It makes it tricky hiring people because they may only have a 2-year life if the grant just drops off. So. The pie for the budget hasn't changed really much. Slight increase in the, decrease in the special ed and a slight increase in the general population education and a slight increase in technology from the pieces of the pie. But I'm talking a fraction of percentages. So it's a very, small change from this year over to the last couple of years. So our next steps, we've actually completed all the way through the school committee approving the budget to go forward after their hearings, which they have 3. So they voted on the 25th to, accept the budget that you see currently. We're actually on a level 3, which Paul, the actual documents, even though the dollars are the same as what's in the, because the town finance side doesn't carry all of our detail, they just carry the total numbers. But we're on a third version of our budget, still within the same dollar amounts, but there have been some changes internally that had to be made for different issues that were found during the process and needed to be corrected. So that budget itself is what the school committee approved on the 25th. And obviously now it comes to you and to the Board of Selectmen as the next steps.
So I believe that's it for the presentation piece of it. I wanted to make a couple of comments and we can open it up to further questions. One is I appreciate the level of transparency of the budget. So there's a spreadsheet you gave us that had almost 600 lines of detail, which some of us did go through, and I sent to the rest of the committee and they can look at. But what struck me is you were asked by the Board of Selectmen to keep things contained in the budget, and you did. I think you guys did a lot of work to get that nailed down. I think, honestly, my biggest concerns that came out were for next year as things sort of spring back to whatever normal is. And I don't know what normal is going to look like, but I do think with those grants going away, it's not clear to me that a lot of other grants are going to jump in to take their place. You've got different technology requirements. You've got lingering COVID, I would guess, at least from like air filtration. So, and you've got increasing expenses overall because of inflation. So not to depress you, Dr. Burdos and Bill, but next year may be tougher than this year.
Yeah, I think we both agree with you on that. None of us know what the new normal is going to be. I will say the one point that you just made, which I don't think I made, we spent so many years trying to make our buildings the most efficient operating buildings relative to heating, lighting, and everything else. And the lighting's been good. That's something that isn't changing. But because of the requirements, to bring in much more fresh air into all the buildings, even in the middle of the winter, that has been part of our increase in our utility cost. Because when you bring in cold air from the outside, you have to heat it. Or obviously you're going to make the buildings very cold. So not only are we running our boilers to maintain our, 69, 70 degree temperatures, but we're now heating cooler outside air that we have to bring in to keep the fresh air exchanges at a much higher level. So again, that may be the norm. I don't know if that's going to be kind of what everybody's looking for going forward. But again, it's kind of an interesting conundrum where you spent so much time and so much money trying to be the most efficient thing you can, and then all of a sudden, you have to throw part of that out the door and rework the systems to go a different way
And do the opposite. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So questions from the rest of the committee?
I think, Bill, I think everyone's in that same boat in terms of the HVAC systems. What kind of exchanges are you running now under these new guidelines?
Well, as typically at this point in the year, we would have our fresh air intake down to probably about 10%. We're still running at about 25 to 30%. During the warmer months, when air gets a little bit staler, we're running as high as 50 and 60% on fresh air exchanges as far as the intakes. But the one thing I will say that I'm kind of proud of the town and the district in general of is that for years we were always kind of on top of our maintenance and our support of our facilities. And so when it came time that when this, when COVID came around and all of a sudden there was a big alert and everybody was panicking about whether or not their systems could handle what needed to be done. And we brought in outside consultants, and quite honestly, we were fairly comfortable and confident that we would be able to do exactly what all the guidelines were saying, and it did prove out. So again, I think the town is smart to maintain their buildings and facilities at a higher level and not let those go down. And I think we have a great facilities team that does that. But it really saved us money. And you heard communities that just couldn't do it. That's why we were in school when COVID first hit. That next year, last year, we were in school when many districts couldn't do it because they couldn't get the air exchanges and everything else that they needed to be done, and we did. So, again, I think that's a huge advantage for a community to have.
It's an intangible, but it's good for the teachers and good for the students.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, relative to the utilities, do you take into account the current market prices, or do they affect you when gas and oil and all this goes up?
Yeah. So that's what I was saying before, Mike, was that we have We have an outside consultant that the town has worked with for a number of years, and we actually are trying to time the market on longer term purchases, if you will. So we have just finished a contract that I think takes our gas out to 26, and our electric may be out as far as 27 on reduced rates and locked in. And again, we're always looking for when that one market change might happen. Some of our contracts actually allow us to drop and pick up a different one if it's more advantageous. So the town has been, really good on that. As I said, it's a group internally. Obviously, I represent the schools and facility side, but we also have Bill Keegan and, the finance department that work in that group as well.
Great, thanks.
Hey, Bill, you talk about additional employees in social work and other kind of mental health areas. Do you have any metrics about the health of our students up or down in comparison to other communities nearby? Because we have academics, MCAS and students passing, but what are we? How do we know we're getting a good bang for a buck in those other non-academic professionals?
I'll start with, even when we go back to the technology as an example and some things that we've added. One of the things that we've added is Panorama. It's through Panorama. It's a social emotional screener, and it's to be able to have an idea from a social emotional mental health side of how our students are doing, and if we have any that would be kind of at risk or slightly at risk, to be able to intervene. Our guidance counselors, our social workers, the increase in the social workers, looking at their caseloads, who they're seeing, the increase in nurses. Nurses play a really important part there too. As far as comparing to other districts, I can tell you that every district is seeing an increased need in the social, emotional, mental health of students. And it's a struggle everywhere. And it's something that we talk about continually, and the needs of our students. And then also just the needs of our families. Right before this call, we had for our secondary students, our parents, I should say, how do you talk with your students about grief and loss? And so we had Dr. Larry Epstein do a webinar on that. We have that for elementary parents next week. So it's not just students in schools, it's families and working with families too. And it takes a considerable amount of time that really can't be underestimated, the amount of time.
And I think, John, to your point, though, it's not like an MCAS where you actually have a score that you can look at and say, okay, we're doing good compared to last year. This is really more individual by individual as we see the needs coming up.
We look at the number of students that are hospitalized, that are not attending school, that we're having a hard time getting them in school. So we look at those numbers too.
So when you meet and say, all right, it's time to hire one more person who can do X, Y, and Z in this non-academic area, is it a feeling? Do you have some metric that says, we need to have so many social workers per students, or how many crises is the school having? What are the numbers that say we need one more of these people? Or are the numbers that say, all right, things are back to normal, people getting over COVID, now it's time we can let one of these people go?
Oh, you want to go ahead, Amy?
I was going to say it's also reflected in IEPs too. Right. From social emotional goals. So you can look at the numbers of our percentages of reevals, students that get picked up for services. So you can look there. As far as how do you decide to let one go? That's going to be the conversation in the future when these grant funds go away.
But I think to Dr. Burris's point, though, and to your question, John, really what we're looking at is caseloads. So we know a social worker can handle X amount of students on a caseload basis. When we get to the point where we're not, able to, maintain that level, and that we're no longer really giving the service level that's on an IEP or thing, then we know that we've not met the caseload thing. That pushes us, whether it's a 0.2, a 0.4, or a 1.0. That's what pushes us into additional. And if we have, conversely, the opposite happen, where all of a sudden, you have a couple classes that come through and their needs are lower, it adjusts what we need for social workers or other positions. It's a number, nursing, there's a lot of support positions throughout the schools. Schools are really drawn on by communities.
So Bill,
now.
how do we know whether we should have that amount of money? How does this committee or the Board of Selectmen know that it's a good number, that we're either doing right by our students, or we're spending too much, or that we're failing them? How do we, we're hiring X number of people and we have X number of students, but we don't know how many caseloads there are, how many students there are in crisis, how many, we're not seeing the sausage, how it's made here.
Again, from a healthcare perspective, there are screening tools to kind of screen some of these things out. I would imagine then you're going to end up getting the parents involved. You can't just be screening their kids for, some kind of mental illness or something of that nature. So, but there are screening tools. I don't know if you use them or not, or you have considered them. Maybe the age bracket is not appropriate because they're typically more used for adults, although they probably are used. Like you said, the IEPs, they probably do something like that in the IEPs.
So I think, John, to your point, if it wasn't for the COVID money that we're getting for additional social workers and some additional support staff, every one of our staff members really is looked at just like a teacher is looked at as far as what is the requirement for their hours in the day. And through that caseload thing. So I suppose, could we show you that we have 3 social workers and that the caseloads range from 35 to 60, depending on the severity of the student's needs and the amount of time that they spend? We do that. That's how we're doing it internally. That's how we're justifying whether or not we need those positions. But that is the same thing that goes throughout our entire employment base. So whether it's a teacher, a nurse, an EL specialist, a speech specialist, an OT, whatever, it's all every year it's looked at based on the total caseloads that we have for each one of those areas.
And when you say, we have so many students per teacher and what's our classroom ratio, that's very easy to understand. And we can say, what's Mansfield doing, what's Walpole doing? We can see, does an individual student get more attention with the right number of teachers to students? I really don't know how we compare, and should we justify when you come back here in a year or two to say, let's keep these people on, let's come up with $500,000. How does it correlate to anything we can understand?
Okay, so I get that point. And quite honestly, if we were, looking to adjust upward, I think at that point, we would lay out whatever the area is, whether it's OT, PT, social workers, whatever. We would lay that whole thing out for you and show, pre-COVID, this is, how the caseloads worked and against the staff we have. This is the caseloads we currently have and the staff we have. And, I'm just going to throw a number because it's not the real numbers, but let's say we had 3 pre-COVID on social workers and now we're going to have 6 because of all these grants. Well, if we don't have the caseload to cover those 6, there is no way we could ever justify to you or anybody else, ourselves, quite honestly, why we would keep 6. We don't need people to stand around looking at each other. So, and we're also not going to put ourselves in a position where one person has, a very low caseload and doesn't have to do much, and another person is working their butts off, because that just puts us in a position with all of our staff that says that's not right. You can't do that. So that we're almost in a self-governing requirement on a constant basis, just to make sure that it's equitable through all of our staffing. And so that means whether I said like a teacher or a specialist, we're always looking at what the demand on them is. And if we're going to look for the taxpayers to come up with a substantial increase to hold staffing, we're going to give you the backup for why that's there and what it is.
So right now you're tracking caseloads. Do you have like month by month? So when this comes up again, Board of Selectmen, school committee, and our committee can see the history?
Well, we have the caseloads don't change month by month. They're
right. If you think about social worker, they're working with DCF, they're working with families, they're working with students, they're working with teachers. They're working with a lot of different people. So as an example, for the last 5-6 years, we've talked about social workers. We had 1 at the middle school, we had 1 at the high school. We continued to put that in our budget going forward, knowing the need was there. We were able to increase it by a 0.5 at the high school. And then we tried to get another 0.5 at the middle school. That took a couple of years. And then with the grant funding, we were able to get the additional 0.5. So we were at 1.5 at the middle school and 1.5 FTEs at the high school. Then we've written these other competitive grants, again, because we know the need for students, particularly of what has happened coming out of COVID. So now we've gotten the funds to be able to increase another 0.5 at the middle school and at the high school, to increase to where we just have 2 social workers at the middle school and 2 at the high school.
Why not make it 5? I mean, we don't know.
Well, one thing, honestly, it's hard to even hire people right now. We're posting for positions that are part of these grant funds, whether it's an interventionist or whether it's a social worker, and we're not just going to hire anyone. We need to be able to have the right person in the position to be able to meet the needs of our students. And every district is trying to do it. So it's really hard to find the people too.
So I just have a question. So I think on what John's saying, right now we all know that a lot of the kids and families have suffered with COVID. So the number of social workers and help that these kids and family need is increased. But not all students, need the same kind of help in their families. So are there some students who are regular ed students that just need some counseling for 4 and 5 months, and then they are, say, discharged from the caseload of that person, and somebody else has taken on? I mean, not all of the kids and families that are getting these services have an IEP right now. Am I correct? Okay.
No.
The majority of them don't.
It is constantly in flux, I guess. That's what we're saying. So it might be hard to measure that right now, but I'm sure records are kept anyway. That in the end, you'll let us know that, some regular kids just needed counseling to get them over the hump and, surviving COVID and their families, and then they're okay and they get discharged. But it wouldn't be the regular students on the IEPs that may need extensive counseling down the road. So.
And the other part of that is really looking at the budget and prioritizing what are the needs.
Right.
It may be when we get to FY24 that if our budget is what it is, we're going to have to make some hard decisions on what's the most important and prioritize.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, I get that.
I have a little bit different question. What proportion of school-age students are homeschooled? And has that changed during COVID? And to what extent does monitoring the homeschooling put a burden on someone in the school system?
So I haven't looked at the numbers because that's under Dr. Mello, the assistant superintendent. She's the one who approves our homeschool plans. In the past, before 5 years ago, when I was the assistant superintendent, and it hasn't really changed, you would think that it would have changed more based on COVID. We've not seen really an increase. We have about 22 families total over the years. So it's a very small population as far as oversight. We have a policy in place and have to go by the Charles decision, and they have to apply, have their curriculum, all of the different criteria, and meet that. And then their plan is approved, and they have to show progress of learning. What that looks like can look different for a student at the end of the year, but it's an annual approval process that goes through, and then having to document the learning that's taken place over the course of the school year.
So what I just heard was there is an approval process. I'm not sure who does the approving.
Dr. Mello does.
There's been no significant change due to COVID.
Correct.
Yeah. Thank you.
I would just like a point of clarification, and Bill, maybe you can probably give it to me. But I believe we vote on the total cost of the budget, and it's not line item by line item, just so everyone's aware. For a lot of the other budgets, we can pull things out and explain why we want them removed. With the school budget, again, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but if we, if we remove a teacher, Bill can remove expenses and move that back. We vote on the total amount.
Correct.
We do not critique line by line. And I think just one more point of clarification is that, these roles that we're talking about, these positions that may or may not be there next year due to grant funds, they're specifically tied to this need. And once it's up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I think everybody's hoping, and it's probably not likely going to be the truth of it, but everybody's hoping that, once we come to a more normal, dealing with COVID, and families and students and everybody else feel a little bit more normal in their activities and don't feel as anxious and don't have as many issues. As Dr. Berto said, it's actually kind of sad to see the number of kids that are over the last couple of years that have been hospitalized, that again, we have to support and go through the process with educating them. It's more than you would think. It's so, I think Dan, you're 100% right on it. Our budget is our budget. It's a one-line budget effectively. We move money as needed as the requirements come during the year. Sometimes we have to make hard decisions that we're not going to do something we really wanted to do because something else came up during the year. And again, we don't go to the reserve fund. We never come back to your group and ask for money out of the reserve fund. Only town side budgets do that. So we're kind of a little bit more of an island, if you will, in that sense. But also, I just want to keep pointing back to what we've given back to the town, that we're not a spend and burn school district. We do what's right for kids. And anytime we can save a nickel, we're going to save it. And anytime we can put it back into the town coffers, we're going to do that because, again, we know we benefit as the years go on with the requirements we have as well.
Yeah, and one more point, I think we brought it up. I think you, Amy, and I talked about it last time around, was sometimes you have a family move into town in August and they have a special needs kid and you guys need to move around money, and it's just up to you to make that happen without coming back to us for increased, funds. So exactly, that's the reason that you're allowed to do that.
Yeah, I mean, and if you think about it, the reason our budget is kind of the way it is, and it's this way for all schools, if you think about last year, where all of a sudden we had to really, put a good size increase in what we paid for our bus drivers to do because we were making more trips than we've ever made, what we had to pay for custodians because they were doing more cleaning and working more overtime so that we keep the buildings on a different level. We had to make cuts out in other places to make that work. Now, we were fortunate that there was just so many things last year that didn't happen. That's why we were able to give the money back that we did, but it would have been even higher if we didn't have those needs as well. So that's why our budget really is a little bit more fluent than most, but it really has to be when you look at the amount of activity that happens within the budget itself.
Question: has dropout rate been stable?
We don't see an increased dropout rate.
You don't see any?
No. Thankfully, I mean, even when a dropout, you're talking about 1-2 students, if that.
What's been interesting, Jack, it's again something I haven't seen a lot of in the last 10 years I've been here, but it's happened. But it's just, I think because of the whole COVID experience, there are just kids that just have a real hard time getting back into the schools for whatever the reason. It's not necessarily they're afraid of catching COVID. It's just that, psychologically they've had this aversion right now. Don't have a lot of them, but we do have some, and it's really kind of interesting to watch, but we have to do our best to get them back here.
Yeah, but they are the potential dropouts, and that's where you need to put attention.
Exactly.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap. I want to thank both of you, Dr. Burrows and Mr. Yukna, for coming and talking to us. If we have any other questions,
I would say, as I've said to the subcommittee when we met the other day, any questions that you guys have, please do not hesitate to let us know. I don't care if it's an individual calling me, just asking for some backup or some detail within the budget itself, or, if you want to have another meeting. I just think that the more you understand of our budget, the more, it benefits us as well. So please feel free to call me, especially on the financial side. But if you had, other issues, I'm sure Dr. Bertos also feels the same way.
Absolutely.
all right. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you very much.
Have a good night.
You too.
You too.
Thank you.
All right. So we will, as I mentioned in the last meeting, in a few weeks, we'll get together and have the actual discussion and the voting on this. Next on the agenda was the approval of the prior meeting minutes. I did not get the minutes, the draft form, until yesterday, and that's not sufficient time for me to turn them around and then get them out to you in time for you to review them. So those will get kicked down the road to a later meeting. So that's it. What any open topics for discussion? Anybody want to say hello to the new folks?
Welcome,
Hi,
Eric and
John.
Mike.
Hi, Eric.
Welcome.
Hi, welcome, Mike and Erica.
Thanks very much.
Welcome, Eric.
Thank you.
Paul, can you remind us who's on for next week?
What's that?
Who is on for next week?
Does anybody remember off the top of your head? I'll have to go look.
Is it safety, public
and-
safety?
And it's, I believe it's Human Services, Board of Health.
Okay.
Oh,
Let me, I can tell you in a moment.
So one thing I was thinking about, it might be helpful if each week I sent everybody not just the agenda, but like an update on whatever else is going on. Because just to make sure everybody's on the same page about what's coming up. So all of you should have the schedule for the upcoming meetings,
Yeah.
but I think it would still help for me to send something.
Yeah, Board of Health, the Council on Aging, the library is on for next week too. I don't know who has the library. Yeah.
Well, so Dennis has the library. Dennis, who did we end up getting in contact with? Man, he's gone, right?
Yeah, the acting director, we actually have a meeting tomorrow morning.
Okay.
Actually, the trustees want to talk to us too.
Got a couple of trustees too. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay. They sat in. I sat in on it a couple of years ago, and they sat in. It was a good group, and the library, like a lot of the social institutions, they had a lot of enthusiasm for it, and it was good to hear from them. Can you flip me the meeting maker on that, Dennis, or is it a Zoom or in person?
Zoom.
Zoom, if you don't mind. I may not be able to make it. I may have meetings tomorrow morning, but just in case.
Okay.
I have a couple things to touch on.
Yeah.
The first is that thank you for getting that from Marie, the gas reallocations. Just going through the budget, it's not exact, but and I'll bring up those points with the individual departments. But it's less than $5,000 difference across the board, so nothing to really grovel about there. But definitely just bring it up. There's a couple thousand left in certain departments, and I'm unsure why, but we'll get some answers on that. Then I was wondering if I sent you an email. I was wondering if we could get the same thing for the reallocation of positions. I know we've had some. They assorted the departments a little bit different, and so some of the money got moved around, and they did the same thing with the DPW too. So rather than try and track all that through the whole budget, if we could get a similar chart or explanation from Marie on how those go, that would be awesome. That would be great.
Do you know which details you're looking for in advance?
Well, I know they moved the DPW guys around. So it's 10% out of this budget, 30% out of this budget, 60% out of this budget, but they moved them $90K out of one, and then they put 60 in another, and it's
so
very.
If you want to sit down, I just want to make sure I ask them the question specifically, so or clear enough. One thing I did like, I saw as part of that conservation got moved into, and I forget the name of the new group. But wherever what was that? Land use. Thank you. What I liked about that is if you looked at last year's budget, the conservation manager and then 34% of a land use administrator were their salary line, and you couldn't figure out. Those are split out now. They don't have to do that weirdo allocation thing. So now if you go look at the budget, the line item is what the line item is, and I like that a lot. I don't know if that's true of all the redos. I just happened to look at conservation last week.
Yeah, I just think it would be a lot easier to have that the same way Marie just did the last one.
Yeah.
Have it put together and just, okay, this came out of here and went to here. Just a quick explanation, and then I don't have to go through the budget book and flip back and forth a million times to kind of get there.
So are you?
We can discuss.
We can. I'm not. We can ask them for whatever we want. I'm only hesitating because in some cases the budget rework actually made things clearer. Like they actually put everything in the same place, so you no longer have to try and piece together changes. So I just want to make sure I'm getting what you want. Or if you want to send a note to Marie with a clear outline of what you need, the clearer it is, the easier it'll be for her to do.
Yep. Sure. Yep, we can do that.
I mean, the thing that struck me about the gas diesel, which I sent out, not all of you may have seen it, is the change was so small that it didn't change anybody's budget, right? Because the biggest budgets in Foxborough have those numbers in them. And the
Well,
overall,
it did pull one of Chris Gallagher's budgets from over 2.5 to under 2.5.
we'll have to talk to him about
Well,
that.
I thought that was pretty thrifty of those guys, but you know,
Very small changes. I was a little surprised. You know, I talked to Bill about this. I can't remember if you were on that call, that the gas and diesel did not go up much. And I think that's the negotiated contract thing. I think they've got a number locked in for a while because it's sort of a ridiculous overall change. Like 2.2 was the number, I think. Mm-hmm. So it's a nice outcome. Whether you pay for that on the back end when it's time to renegotiate, who knows? But, you know, it's good to have.
The last thing I want to bring up, and I'm sure you probably, a few of you noticed it, and I'm probably way late to the party, but because I've had both of my liaison meetings the past 2 weeks right up front, I've just been going to those pages in the books, and I finally got the chance to read through the front 4 or 5 pages of the PDF where it explains what's going on. Did anyone else take note that they're counting money for a town manager search?
Yeah.
Yes, that was also explained with Bill, Paul, Eric, and I were on there. So I think it's $15,000, but that is a up to amount. So that amount might not need to be spent, and they're anticipating some amount. I think they gave themselves plenty of buffer room, so I don't see that full amount being spent.
Yeah, that's just because of Bill's retirement, right?
Right, and I'm also thinking about buybacks and stuff associated with that, savings maybe associated with that, maybe not, but that will be a pretty significant change for those of us who are still on this board next year. So just thought it was notable.
Yeah, good call out. Just a gentle pause to see if anybody else has a question. All right, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
I'm going to again illicitly use the hand count method. So all in favor, raise your hand. All opposed, raise your hand. That is unanimous. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night.